the U.S. Army's Typhon missile system. Combining all of these assets provides a layered and integrated fires capability, enhancing our ability to target and engage from both land and sea as a modern and lethal force.
The most important American weapon against China may not be an aircraft carrier, a stealth bomber, or even a nuclear submarine. It may be a chain of islands stretching from Japan to the Philippines. This month, the United States is deploying its powerful Typhon missile system to southern Japan for the first time as part of major military exercises with its closest allies. On paper, this appears to be another weapons deployment, another military drill, and another chapter in the growing rivalry between Washington and Beijing. In reality, it represents something far more profound. The United States is attempting to transform the geography of East Asia itself into a strategic weapon.
As China ramps up its military activity around Taiwan, the U.S. and its regional allies are attempting to deter Beijing's growing power.
From the Japanese home islands to Okinawa, Taiwan, and the Philippines. A natural barrier known as the First Island Chain has become the central battlefield of 21st century geopolitics. If China cannot break through this maritime barrier, it cannot freely dominate the Western Pacific. And increasingly, that appears to be precisely the strategy Washington is pursuing.
We are reminded that our legacy has always been rooted in two enduring principles: a dedication to defending our values and a steadfast commitment to fighting shoulder to shoulder with our allies.
If there is one lesson that the great geopolitical thinkers understood, it is this: geography is the most permanent force in international politics. Governments change, leaders come and go, technologies evolve, but geography remains largely unchanged. And for centuries, the geography of East Asia has shaped the rise and fall of great powers. Stretching from the Japanese home islands through the Ryukyu Islands and Okinawa, down through Taiwan and into the northern Philippines, lies a chain of islands that military planners call the First Island Chain. At first glance, it appears to be little more than a collection of islands scattered across the Pacific. In reality, it is one of the most strategically important geographical features on Earth. This chain forms a natural maritime barrier separating continental Asia from the wider Pacific Ocean. Any naval power seeking to move from China's coastal waters into the open Pacific must pass through a series of narrow choke points, controlled or monitored by America's allies and partners. History offers many examples of how geography shapes power. For centuries, Britain maintained its security by controlling the English Channel, preventing hostile powers from gaining direct access to the British Isles. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the United States viewed control of the Caribbean and its surrounding waters as essential to its national security and global influence. Today, the First Island Chain plays a similar role in Asia. For the United States and its allies, this geography represents a defensive barrier that helps preserve the balance of power in the Pacific. But for China, it represents something very different: a strategic constraint that limits its ability to project military power beyond its own coastline. If geography provides America's greatest strategic advantage in the Western Pacific, it also creates China's greatest strategic vulnerability. For centuries, China's strategic outlook was shaped primarily by threats from land. But in the 21st century, China's prosperity, military power, and global influence increasingly depend on the sea. Today, China is the world's largest trading nation. It imports enormous quantities of oil and natural gas through maritime routes. Its economy depends on uninterrupted access to global markets. And its navy, now the world's largest by number of ships, depends on the ability to operate freely beyond China's coastal waters. Yet geography imposes severe limits on these ambitions. To reach the wider Pacific Ocean, Chinese naval forces must pass through a series of narrow maritime choke points, including the Miyako Strait near Okinawa, the Taiwan Strait, the Bashi Channel between Taiwan and the Philippines, and the Luzon Strait leading into the Philippine Sea. These waterways represent not merely geographical features, but strategic bottlenecks that can be monitored, contested, and potentially blocked during a conflict. This is why Chinese military strategists have long viewed the first island chain not as a defensive barrier, but as a form of strategic encirclement imposed by the United States and its allies. History offers important parallels. Before the First World War, Imperial Germany faced the overwhelming maritime power of the British Royal Navy and feared strategic containment. During the Cold War, Soviet naval forces struggled to break through NATO-controlled maritime choke points into the Atlantic Ocean. Today, China increasingly confronts a similar geopolitical reality. From Beijing's perspective, the challenge is not simply American military power. The challenge is that geography itself appears to favor China's strategic competitors. And this is precisely why Washington is now attempting to transform geography into a weapon. For nearly 80 years, American military power in the Pacific rested on a simple principle: control the seas with aircraft carriers. From the Second World War to the Cold War and into the post-Cold War era, aircraft carriers became the ultimate symbol of American military dominance. They projected power across oceans, reassured allies, and allowed Washington to maintain its position as the dominant maritime power in the Pacific. But the rise of China has forced American military planners to reconsider a fundamental question: what happens when aircraft carriers themselves become vulnerable? Over the past 2 decades, China has invested heavily in anti-access and area denial capabilities, developing thousands of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, anti-ship weapons, and long-range strike systems designed specifically to challenge American naval power in the Western Pacific. In response, the United States has quietly begun one of the most important strategic shifts since the end of the Cold War. After withdrawing from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019, Washington resumed the development of land-based intermediate-range missile systems. Among the most significant of these is the Typhon missile system, a mobile launcher capable of firing both Tomahawk cruise missiles and SM-6 missiles against land and maritime targets. The significance of these systems lies not simply in their firepower, but in their survivability. Unlike aircraft carriers, land-based missile launchers are relatively inexpensive, highly mobile, difficult to detect, and easy to disperse across numerous locations. Instead of targeting a handful of large American warships, an adversary would be forced to locate and neutralize hundreds, potentially thousands, of dispersed missile positions spread across multiple islands and allied territories. If geography is America's greatest strategic advantage in Asia, then Japan sits at the center of that advantage. Look at a map of the Western Pacific. Japan stretches from the Northern Pacific through Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands, extending southward toward Taiwan and the Philippines. This geography effectively forms the backbone of the first island chain. And nowhere is this more apparent than on Japan's southwestern islands. Yonaguni Island, Japan's westernmost territory, lies less than 110 kilometers from Taiwan. Nearby islands such as Miyako, Ishigaki, Okinawa, and Kyushu now host an increasingly sophisticated network of military facilities, command centers, air bases, missile defenses, and logistics hubs. Japan already hosts the headquarters of the U.S. 7th Fleet, America's largest forward-deployed naval force, along with tens of thousands of American troops and some of Washington's most important military infrastructure in the Indo Pacific. Recent exercises such as Resolute Dragon 2026 and Valiant Shield 2026 reveal how rapidly this strategy is evolving. American Typhon missile systems, HIMARS launchers, Marine littoral regiments, anti-ship missile units, and joint command centers are now operating across Japan's southwestern island chain. For the first time, some of these missile systems will remain stored in Japan after major exercises conclude, suggesting a longer-term strategic shift. Perhaps the most important strategic development in Asia today is not the rise of a new alliance. It is the emergence of a new type of coalition. For decades, American military strategy in the Pacific relied on a handful of major bases, large naval formations, and overwhelming maritime superiority. But the geography of the Western Pacific and the growth of Chinese military power have forced Washington to adopt a different approach. Instead of concentrating military power, the United States is increasingly dispersing it. Across the First Island chain, a multinational network of allies and partners is gradually being transformed into a distributed deterrence architecture. Japan is deploying Type 12 anti-ship missiles across its southwestern islands. The United States is deploying Typhon missile systems, HIMARS launchers, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and marine littoral regiments. The Philippines is expanding access to strategic locations near Taiwan and the Bashi Channel while pursuing BrahMos missile capabilities. Australia is integrating more closely into regional missile defense and long-range strike planning. And Taiwan itself, while not formally part of this coalition, occupies the geographical center around which much of this strategy revolves. What makes this strategy particularly significant is that it does not depend on any single military base, aircraft carrier, or country. Instead, it creates multiple overlapping layers of deterrence spread across thousands of kilometers of ocean and dozens of islands. The strategic importance of this approach can already be seen in places like the Batanes Islands in the northern Philippines. Until recently, these islands were a remote and peaceful frontier. Today, they have become a critical component of American contingency planning because they sit astride the Bashi Channel, one of the most important maritime gateways between the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. As one former Philippine military chief bluntly observed, you cannot invade Taiwan if you do not control the northern Philippines. History offers a useful comparison. Before the First World War, Britain maintained the European balance of power not through a single alliance or military base, but through a network of partnerships that collectively deterred any one power from dominating the continent. For nearly a century, no military platform symbolized American power more than the aircraft carrier. From the Pacific campaigns of World War II to the Cold War and the conflicts of the post-Cold War era, aircraft carriers allowed the United States to project overwhelming military force across vast distances. They became the centerpiece of American global strategy and the ultimate expression of maritime dominance. But every military advantage eventually produces a counter-strategy. Over the past 2 decades, China has invested heavily in developing the capabilities designed specifically to challenge American naval supremacy. Today, the People's Liberation Army possesses thousands of conventional missiles, sophisticated anti-ship ballistic missiles, long-range cruise missiles, hypersonic weapons, and an increasingly integrated network of surveillance and targeting systems. The strategic question facing Washington is therefore not whether aircraft carriers remain important. It is whether they remain sufficient. The American response has been profound. Rather than concentrating military power in a handful of large and vulnerable platforms, the United States is increasingly embracing distributed warfare, mobile missile forces, dispersed logistics networks, expeditionary bases, and island-based denial operations spread across the Western Pacific. Exercises such as Resolute Dragon and Valiant Shield illustrate this transformation. Typhon missile systems, HIMARS launchers, marine littoral regiments, anti-ship missile batteries, and autonomous platforms are now being integrated into a network designed not necessarily to destroy China's military outright, but to deny it freedom of action. In this emerging strategic environment, victory may depend less on controlling the oceans with fleets and more on controlling geography with missile networks. If there is one conclusion that emerges from America's evolving strategy in the Western Pacific, it is this: every major military exercise, missile deployment, alliance initiative, and strategic planning effort increasingly points toward a single scenario: Taiwan. In recent years, military planners across the Indo Pacific have grown increasingly concerned that the warning time for a potential Chinese military operation against Taiwan may be shrinking. As a result, exercises such as Resolute Dragon, Valiant Shield, Balakatan, and numerous Japanese and American deployments are no longer simply about demonstrating alliance solidarity. They are increasingly designed to prepare for a conflict that could rapidly spread across the entire First Island chain. If a conflict over Taiwan were to occur, Taiwan itself would not be the only battlefield. Japan would become essential because it hosts America's most important military infrastructure in Asia. The Philippines would become essential because control of the Bashi Channel and northern Luzon could determine access between the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Guam would become essential because it serves as America's principal strategic hub in the Western Pacific. In other words, a conflict over Taiwan would transform the entire first island chain into a single interconnected battle space. This is because Taiwan is not merely an island, nor simply a territorial dispute between Beijing and Taipei. It is the strategic hinge connecting Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and the broader Pacific balance of power. For China, control of Taiwan would provide greater access to the Pacific Ocean and weaken the strategic barriers imposed by the first island chain. For the United States and its allies, preserving Taiwan's autonomy is inseparable from preserving the existing balance of power in Asia. Which is why, increasingly, the future of the Indo-Pacific appears to revolve around a single geographical reality. Who controls Taiwan may ultimately determine who shapes the strategic order of Asia in the 21st century. Historians often assume that technology changes warfare, but sometimes geography changes history. The deployment of American missile systems across Japan reveals 5 profound transformations: the militarization of the first island chain, Japan's return as a strategic power, the rise of distributed deterrence, the emergence of a balancing coalition against Chinese dominance, and the transformation of the Western Pacific into the world's most important geopolitical frontier. The missiles themselves matter, but the geography they now occupy matters far more. Because throughout history, the powers that controlled the world's strategic choke points rarely controlled them by accident.